Hello, everybody. Welcome to today's Teaching Intellectual Property at Schools webinar. Lea Montes.
Hello.
Hello. She's an intellectual property expert at the International Project Management Office with 6 years of experience helping companies and researchers with intellectual property. Lea, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Robert, for the introduction. And hello and welcome everyone to this webinar on IP4Teen and teaching intellectual property in schools. Well, we just went through a short introduction, so I think I will just jump into the presentation. So today I would like to start this short presentation by defining the concept of intellectual property. Basically, what is it? Some of you here might know already, and some of you, since I know there are some teachers in the room, since this is primarily a webinar for teachers, you might not know exactly what it is. You might have an idea. So we will go through it very quickly. Basically, in like one word, intellectual property refers to the creations of the mind, such as inventions, literary and artistic works, also designs, symbols, logos, images used in trade, for instance. So what I want to stress here, that you might not be aware, in fact, is that intellectual property is literally everywhere. Intellectual property is the technology that you will use daily. It can be your phone, it can be your car technology, it can be the technology that you have in your kitchen to bake some cookies. Intellectual property is also what you read or what you watch at the end of the day to change your mind from work. It is also in what you wear, etc. Basically, all of these aspects, so created by the human mind, the appearance of a product, a logo, a specific invention, a specific work of art or literature, all of these, they are protected legally by law, by what we call intellectual property rights. So here to give you again the same inventions, the same illustrations. Inventions, for instance, that I mentioned, will be protected by patents. Here you have again the example of this phone, for instance. If you have any kind of smartphone, like in any phone like this, a very simple phone, you will have probably dozens or even hundreds of patents that will cover different aspects, different inventions. For instance, the camera, the fingerprint technology, the face recognition, the voice recognition, those are all intellectual property. Those are all patents that cover different types of invention. Another example would be the appearance of objects, for instance, that will be protected by intellectual designs. Here, if you think about your favorite handbag, if you think about the design of your iPhone, for instance, these are all things that, in fact, are a bit distinctive and they will be protected by intellectual property rights. Similarly, again, your favorite TV shows will be protected by copyright. Your favorite songs or your favorite video games, for instance, will also be protected by copyright. So basically, intellectual property is everywhere. And what is perhaps important to note is that the idea of intellectual property protection is as follows. Basically, it's a legal system of rights that is designed as an incentive to creators and to innovators in the world. Basically coming up with a new work, with a new book, with a new medicine or new technology takes time, it takes resources. So basically this all takes time and dedication. And in return, by law, inventors and creators are given some exclusive rights. So this is the whole intellectual property system. You create something and then you get exclusivity to benefit from it in the future. And in fact, as you can see on this slide here, which are figures, in fact, from our own course, as you can see, intellectual property contributes quite a lot to a company's revenues and, well, indirectly then to the global economy. And just to understand, in fact, how important it is, just have a look here at the statistics. Basically, almost half of all EU economic activity is composed by the activity of IP-intensive industries. When we talk about IP-intensive industries, we in fact refer to industries that will make like a use of IP rights that is above average. To give you an example, obviously all the entertainment industry, the movie production industry, they will rely very heavily on copyright. The fashion industry is very IP intensive because it will rely a lot on brands and on designs. Obviously, all the tech industry also very IP intensive, brands, patents. So all of these, basically, they make up almost half of the EU economic activity, which is huge. And of course, as you can see here, this is reflected in terms of job creation, where basically 84 million jobs in the EU depend on industries that make above average use of intellectual property. So that was for the economic side, basically how important it can be. Well, in fact, this leads us, as you will see here, to what I would call the dark side of IP. We just saw that intellectual property rights, they are exclusive rights given to creators of inventions and creative works. And actually, this generates values, it generates revenue, it generates jobs. So, of course, the other side of the coin is that other entities may actually want to take advantage of that. They might want to take advantage of the reputation of inventors, of creators. So what they will do is that they will copy intellectual property, products, content, etc., that belongs to other people in order to draw revenue, money from it. This is the whole idea behind counterfeiting and piracy. So in fact, those are two notions that are quite similar, but they apply in to different objects, basically. As you might know, you might be familiar with this already. Counterfeiting is, is basically you going to your Sunday market and seeing a bunch of handbags that look really like Chanel handbags, for instance. And if you have a closer look, you might see that, for instance, the Chanel brand is spelled with two N's, like Chanel, but not really. It's also, to give you another example, of course, you go see a Vuitton bag, it costs 20 euros. And actually, you will see, if you look a bit closer, that the LV logo is a little bit crooked. It's similar, but it's not the same. So this is counterfeiting. Basically, counterfeiting is an entity that doesn't have the IP rights, that will copy some products, the appearance of some products, or sometimes they will copy directly the brand and the logo. And the idea behind this is that, of course, these people try to, to confuse the consumers, to make you think that this is the original, this is the real thing, and of course, to make you buy it. Sometimes it's obvious, obviously, if you see this Chanel bag with 2 or 3 N's to the brand, you might wonder if something is wrong. Sometimes it's not so obvious. And actually, just to give you another idea of counterfeiting, this is not only about fashion or clothes. So it's not only the bag that you see on the market. Counterfeiting is also a huge problem, for instance, in the car industry, which is something that is quite talked about these days. Especially in the spare parts industry. Basically, there's a huge, let's say, subterranean or sub-industry that is, now specialized in producing fake spare parts for cars. And I mean, obviously, I don't have to stress how dangerous this can be. So it's not just about like the weird handbag that you see on the market. It can have it can happen in a lot of other fields. And finally, perhaps a last example about counterfeiting that also is, in fact, perhaps more problematic than the issue of fake bags, is counterfeiting in the pharmaceuticals market. So here, especially in developing countries, you have companies who specialize in selling, fake drugs, fake medicines that look like the real thing, same logo, same name, same box, same pill, in fact, except, inside there's nothing, or it's not the right drug. So counterfeiting happens in a lot of sectors. Obviously it's a problem, as you can see here, especially on the right. You can see this little chart. This is from the EUIPO, and this summarizes the annual economic losses due to counterfeiting. And you can see, I think it was in 2018, that in Europe alone, like 56,000 million euros were lost in revenue due to counterfeiting. Primarily clothes, as you can see, which is like a very counterfeit area, and then cosmetics as well. But as mentioned, it really applies to any field, like electronic appliances, fake phones, fake drugs, fake car spare parts, etc., etc. And then you have the issue of piracy, which is related. So piracy is a bit the same idea. It's like someone who doesn't have any IP rights will actually, will copy some works and will make them available without authorization. Here, the difference is actually we are talking about copyrighted content. So mostly books, films, video games. And well, when I was little, and probably when you were little too, depending on your age, piracy was really limited. It was about taking, for me, when I was a child, it was about taking a recording tape, you know, those big black tapes, taking that tape and going to record a movie from the tape of a friend that perhaps she had already copied from another friend. So at the time that was piracy. And when I was a bit older, it was all about burning CDs. So I was buying those empty CDs, perhaps you remember them, and then you just copy the CDs of your friends that you like, and there you have your free CD. So for a long time, piracy was actually, well, always illegal, but actually it was really contained because, well, it was one person making one copy at a time. Of course, as you can imagine, this totally changed with internet. So in the past 20 years, well, basically piracy exploded. And well, most of today's piracy is actually taking place online. If you are just a bit familiar with looking for films or content online, you probably know that basically you can find everything there. You can find HDTV versions of your favorite movies. You can find pirated copies of famous video games that actually are there for free. Any kind of songs in MP3 format, any video. In fact, you can find everything online for free. Well, as reflected in the statistics, obviously, well, counterfeiting and piracy are a big deal in today's economy. And hence the existence, in fact, of projects like ours to try and educate people about this issue. So yeah, just to summarize this far, basically, on the one hand, you have intellectual property that is really key to the European economy and to job creation in Europe. At the same time, you have counterfeiting and piracy, which are the dark side of it and which are, of course, really damaging the economy, and they are depriving us, in fact, from an important source of revenue. So obviously here the main message would be ideally to say no to piracy and just to say no to fakes. But we know that it's not so obvious, of course, and that this takes time and it takes education and awareness raising in order to get to a point where, well, counterfeiting is not so harmful to the economy anymore. And that's why it's actually very important to start at an early age, to start fostering respect for IP, or at least I would say perhaps to start simply fostering understanding for IP, understanding what it is and understanding why it's important. So starting with teenagers. Teenagers, because of course, like in many things in life, the earlier you learn about something, the more you can actually implement and understand it, for sure. But also because, in fact, as you probably know, if you have teenagers facing you in class, if you are teaching teenagers on a weekly basis, well, in fact, teenagers are a key target on the piracy and counterfeiting market because, I mean, clearly they are very into brands, they are very into digital content, into social media. They are really much into appearance, brands, etc. So you have all this influence that teenagers are interested into, the whole appearance, brand, etc., all the technology as well that they're trying to get. And of course, you have, well, the price that is associated to that. New Nike sneakers, a new Supreme hat or something costs something. And in that context, for teenagers, it might be very tempting or simply easier, in fact, to just, buy some fake hats, buy some fake shoes. You know, if it looks the same, what's the difference for them? There's no difference. And at the same time, it might also be easier for them to stream their favorite TV shows or favorite movies without paying, because why should they, you know, if it's available for free? All of this to say, this is what our project is about, the IP4Teen project. So in a nutshell, what is IP4Teen? In fact, IP4Teen is a one-year project that basically is funded this year by the EUIPO. EUIPO is the EU IP office. And we are not the only project like this. In fact, they are funding a lot, like an entire series of projects like ours, focused on 1 year, focused on Europe and on raising awareness to teenagers. What we propose for IP4Teen is actually an online course. So we decided actually to tackle these issues, importance of intellectual property, protection of IP in the economy, and fighting against fakes and counterfeiting. We chose to address this from the angle of teachers, meaning using you, the teachers, as our intermediary in class. So that's why we have created an online course, this MOOC, for teachers and for future teachers. And the idea is that then you, the teachers, will reach the teenagers, in class by actually taking some of the contents that we have created and using it in class to teach your students about intellectual property. But just so you know, all the contents that we have made available are for free. So they are really here for teachers, for people working in IP as well, or people working in awareness raising, to take these contents and really make sure that they are reaching as many kids as possible. Basically, that's the whole point of IP4Teen. Again, it's an online course, Spanish and English. If you don't have time to take the online course, you can just go on the website and check some of the contents we have created. All the contents were created with in mind 3 main ideas, as you can see here on this slide. The first idea is to help teenagers understand that IP should be protected and that you should protect the efforts of creativity and innovation from there, but also directly those of other people, for sure. The second idea that we have is that, of course, this course and this content should really stress the importance of privileging when you can, buying, resorting to original products, downloading original content online. And finally, and for me, this is a key part, in fact, because ultimately this is what might be more decisive in creating a change of mind, is that we really try to stress also the risks linked to counterfeiting and piracy. This is harmful to the economy is one thing, but at the same time, it can be harmful to you directly. We'll get back to this in a minute. So this is what we have tried to do, something about these thematics. And how did we do that? In fact, we did this through 6 very simple and fun modules. Well, at least we hope they are fun, but that's why also we are talking to you today, because we hope that you will try them and you will tell us what you think. As you can see, the first 2 modules are quite horizontal. So IP basics, IP in the economy. So it's really about making you understand and indirectly making kids understand what is IP, the fact that it's everywhere, what it relates to, and also how important it is in today's economy. The 4 other modules, personally, for me, I think they are more fun. Obviously, they are about IP applied to 4 thematic areas, which we believe are areas of specific interest or relevance to teenagers. This is fashion, social media, electronic devices, so all the technology, and finally, the digital platform. So here we talk about streaming websites, for instance, downloading TV shows online, etc. So this is what we have tried to do. We have organized the course in 6 modules, and all the contents that we have created basically revolves around these six thematics. And the project goals, I talked about this a little already. Basically, with these modules and through teachers talking to kids about these topics, what we hope, of course, is that basically we will manage to increase young people's knowledge and respect for IP rights, that we will help them understand the safety risks, and at the same time that in time this will lead very gradually to a reduction of young people purchasing counterfeited goods or pirated content. So these are the main goals. Of course, it's very ambitious, but this is what we are striving to do, at least. And this brings us, let's say, to the core of today's presentation, the 10 recommendations that we would like to share with you concerning the teaching of IP in secondary schools. So here the context is the following. As explained, we are not teachers, we are simply intellectual property experts. And in order to reach teenagers, in order to really reach the classroom, we need you, teachers. We need also perhaps other multipliers. We saw today that there are also people from IP offices in the room, for instance. So we need the multipliers and the teachers to act also as intermediaries between us and the teenagers, the students. And obviously we are not teachers, so we are not specialized in any kind of teaching activity. This is why we need you to actually do this part of the work. I would say at the same time, we are very aware that you might also need our help because, I believe that the topic of IP is quite, for some people it's quite boring. It can be like seen as a boring legal issue. And at the same time, it can be a bit intimidating. It's very broad. It can be quite legal at times. So it might be a little bit difficult to tackle how to approach this in class, for instance, how to make teenagers interested in something that is about legislation, about like what you can do, what you cannot do, etc. So for this reason, what we have tried to do today is to sum up a bit some recommendations that we have and also some recommendations that we got after testing these contents. A few months ago, we tested all the contents that we have created: infographics, games, interactive videos, case studies, etc., etc. So lots of teaching content for teachers and kids. We tested that with teachers, kids, future teachers. And on the basis of this testing phase, we actually were able to come up with also some recommendations from the people involved. And this is what we would like to summarize today. So in short, we have 5 short tips about the subject itself: intellectual property, why it is relevant to children, why it should be interested to teenagers. And then I will go more about the approach in class, like about with 5 tips more about how to approach, how to introduce the topic in front of a classroom of teenagers. About the subject itself, as mentioned, we are totally aware that intellectual property is probably not the most fun topic from the outset, and is probably not the most engaging topics for someone who is 12, 13 years old. And that's why our first main tip actually would be to really stress that intellectual property is everywhere. As mentioned, IP is really an abstract concept for many people, even for adults. So obviously for children, this is something that is could be seen as irrelevant. In fact, something that is a set of legal rules, like not interesting. The thing is actually, like many people do not notice, teenagers perhaps even less, but I would start by telling the students that actually they're surrounded by IP. Like most of what they like is actually intellectual property rights. Okay, you have a cool hat with a Supreme logo. This is intellectual property. You have your favorite Vans shoes on your feet. This is intellectual property. You're playing video games. This has an entire layer of intellectual property on the design, the brand, the music used in the games, etc., the characters. This is all intellectual property. So I would start by really beginning with examples. Everything that they have surrounding them in their everyday life, just looking around them, is actually, very, very likely to contain at least an element of intellectual property, brands, copyright, etc. So it is relevant. It is very relevant because it's all around them. So we would perhaps start here for everyone who's facing teenagers saying this is abstract and this is not relevant to me. In fact, it is. And this brings us to another tip. Also, I would say a little bit in the same vein, that let's say that a very common, how would I say that? A common belief, in fact, of people when resorting to piracy and to counterfeiting is to say, I don't really care because, in fact, Nike doesn't need my money. Or, for instance, if I'm streaming a TV show illegally online, Netflix has enough money already. Those are big companies. They don't need me to pay for them, etc. And this is a very, very common argument, in fact, of people infringing IP rights, saying, listen, IP, in fact, benefits to big companies. And, I'm not doing that. So I'm just going to do my thing. And no one will get really hurt because those companies have enough money already. So here, what we would also perhaps suggest telling younger audiences is that IP is just not something that benefits big companies. It's just, of course, companies like Apple, like Amazon, like anything, Samsung, they benefit really, really heavily from IP. They have a lot of patents, they have a lot of brands, so they make a lot of money out of this, but they are not the only ones. On the one hand, you have smaller companies as well that benefit a lot from IP. And here what you could do is ask around in the classroom, ask around to your students. Do they have parents who have their own business, for instance? Do they have people in the family who own perhaps a trademark or who work in creative industries, who are artists, who play music? Here the idea is to show that IP is not just for big companies. It is as well, but it's also benefiting perhaps, well, smaller companies around them, including in the family. In the same argument, I would also add one thing, is that you often have this very big misconception that basically IP is just for the big companies. If you take copyright and piracy, for instance, a lot of arguments of people streaming illegal copies of movies online will tell you, well, you know, those movie studios, they don't need my money, they have enough already. So here I would like to give you one example, which I think is quite interesting. A couple of years ago, it was revealed, in fact, that Game of Thrones, the HBO TV show, was the most pirated TV show ever in history, which means that there were millions of people streaming or downloading Game of Thrones without paying anything to HBO, just from torrents websites, illegal streaming websites, just direct download links, etc. And well, you probably know people, I know people, of course, who will tell you, well, you know, it's fine, HBO has a lot of money and basically it won't make a difference if I download this from my favorite parent website. But in fact here, this might also be useful to remind people at this point that it's not just HBO. Like, if you take this example of Game of Thrones, which is filming in multiple locations in Europe, which is, hiring, thousands of people on a single episode. This is a whole IP ecosystem. It's not just HBO making money. It's also an entire string and series of smaller companies, catering companies, special effects companies in many countries, makeup effects companies, etc., like IT companies, obviously. It's like behind these big studios, you also have a lot of people who have jobs thanks to like big machines like HBO's Game of Thrones or anything like that. So I think this is something that might be also relevant to younger people, to tell them, okay, it's not just that, it's also think about all the economy that relies on, well, this TV show or this building this device or anything. So IP is a whole ecosystem, and even small companies benefit from it a lot. And I think this is the main takeaway point from point 2. Again, about still the same recurring argument, perhaps. The same idea of people, especially younger people, telling you, listen, this actually doesn't concern me. Big companies, small companies, IP being everywhere. Okay, fine. But in fact, I don't care because I do not benefit from it. So why should I care? And in fact, here, I think it's a good point that kids, teenagers can also be reminded that IP is not something that only benefits other people. This is also something that can benefit them directly. Here I'm thinking about if you have students, teenagers who perhaps are more on the creative side, for instance. Imagine they play guitar, they compose a couple of songs, they have perhaps a small YouTube channel or something. This is intellectual property. Whatever they do, if they make even TikTok videos or, you know, short sketches on Instagram TV or whatever, this is all intellectual property. The photo they post on Instagram, imagine if it's something really nice and then it's taken up by other websites or something. This is their intellectual property and they have rights over it as well. So here I would really stress that they can benefit from IP too, not only big companies, small companies, not only adults basically. IP can be a tool for everyone. And this brings us to our tip 4. Here I mentioned this a little bit already. Here, the common argument will not be, yeah, this doesn't concern me. It will be, well, probably you heard this a lot of times already, people telling you, well, in fact, why should I pay 2,000 euros, perhaps, for a bag that actually I can find for 25 euros on the market. So here, I mean, obviously, especially for counterfeiting, you have a million examples of the most counterfeited brands on earth. Brands like Louis Vuitton, brands, old-fashioned brands like Gucci. Probably you've seen a million. I mean, I'm pretty sure I have seen more fake Gucci bags in my life than actual Gucci clothes, Gucci bags. It's the same for, especially in the fashion industry. So there's really this misconception that basically if you see a counterfeited product, especially in fashion, well, it's the same, but actually it's cheaper. So why should you care about buying the real deal? And here I think it's really important to remind people that, well, no, it's not the same. First, if you buy counterfeited products, most of the time it's important to know that there will be no guarantee. You will have no client service, you will have no return policy, obviously. Usually, once it's sold, the seller will disappear, especially if it's online. Same on the market, in fact. And yeah, no warranties and no safety, nothing. With fashion, it can be mostly a matter of quality, which means that perhaps you will buy shoes that will break or tear down after, just a few weeks of wearing them. With bags, it can be that perhaps the handle will break after just a couple of hours. So this is annoying, but it's not necessarily dangerous. Then, of course, you can have other issues as well with counterfeit products. Sometimes they will be made from cheaper materials with cheaper products, like especially the colors, etc., and this can cause allergies. So those are all things that are mostly problems of counterfeited products. Of course, then you can be in institutions where counterfeiting is more dangerous, and of course, this is the issue with potential injuries, especially with fake electronic devices, technology that can actually properly, dysfunction, that can implode, etc. And here it's very important to remind teenagers that basically if they buy counterfeited products, not only clothes or bags, but also especially technology, then they might face issues for their own safety. So this is quite important. And here, well, any teenager who's a bit paying attention might actually tell you, well, okay, this is about counterfeiting, but for me, if I'm streaming Game of Thrones online from this illegal website, basically, well, I'm not risking any harm. And actually, it's not true. In principle, you won't be risking any physical harm, obviously. But then it's also very important to remind teenagers that in many cases, piracy, consulting pirated content online also has a lot of risks. And here I'm referring to websites that most of you probably have seen, probably know. These types of illegal streaming or downloading websites where you go and you have a lot of ads with naked ladies or very weird pop-ups, pornographic content, then pop-up windows asking you for instance, your credit card details, telling you it's free, but you have to let us know your bank account details just for registration purposes. So you have risks. You have risks of breach of data, you have risks of financial data being stolen, and you have risks of just basically all the worst spyware, Trojan horses, etc., being just put into your computer. So all of this to say, actually IP counterfeiting and piracy is a lot about quality and safety, not just about other people making money, not just that, but also about making sure that you evolve in a safe environment. So this, I see we have questions already. I will address them later at the Q&A stage. And this brings us to the last tip about intellectual property. Here, I know it's easy to say, but in fact, we would try to recommend a positive approach. Positive approach in the sense that for many teenagers, IP and all this legal stuff, like much legal stuff, it's a lot of prohibitions. It's a lot of adult people telling them, you cannot do that, you cannot do that, you don't have the right to do that. It can be frustrating, I imagine, and it doesn't have to be so efficient, in fact. So, in fact, it could also be interesting, in my opinion, in our opinion at IP4Teen, to show IP as something positive to your students, to teenagers. So not just a set of prohibitions, but showing them that actually without intellectual property, there is no way ever that Apple, Samsung, or any of their favorite mobile brands, for instance, would be developing all the cool technology that they like, because they would have no incentive to do so. And here we get back to the start of this presentation about why IP is important, because it's really an incentive to creation, to creators, inventors to develop new things, because then they know they will have exclusive rights to benefit from it. So this is the whole cycle. And still about this positive approach, of course, reminding the same teens that without IP, their favorite TV shows would never exist, because in fact, the studios would never have any way to pay for any production of any slightly expensive TV show, not Game of Thrones level, but any other TV show that costs a bit of money with a bit of special effects, etc., is something that needs well, a lot of investment in production. And without intellectual property rights and the knowledge of knowing that you secure the copyright and then you will be able to exploit it, there would be no incentive for any studio to create something, let's say, a bit qualitative. There would simply be not enough money for it. So this is all about IP as a main topic, things that we think could be relevant when approaching it with students. And then the 5 last tips to finish these recommendations are more about methodology, we would say. It's about how, imagine you arrive the morning with your class, how you would actually bring this up. It's not necessarily obvious. And again, we are not teachers, so we really try to give some tips, but please feel free if you check the materials or anything, if you take the course, to really let us know what you think, especially if you try it with children, because in the end, we are just recommending, but you are in a better position to let us know. So here, our first tip in terms of how to approach this in a classroom would be, well, depending on which teacher you are, but depending on which subject you are teaching, perhaps to link IP to one of the subjects you are teaching. So of course, it depends what you are doing. If you are doing sports, if you are a sports teacher, it might be more difficult. Although then you could start with, teenagers' favorite sports gear, the shoes, the clothes, etc. Go through brands, Nike, Reebok, etc. And from there, talk about intellectual property. But just to give you a few examples, for instance, imagine you are an economy teacher. Here you could start by the angle of IP in the economy. We have an entire module, so with, again, case studies, games, etc., dedicated to it. Basically, you could start by explaining your students that in terms of, of your country's economy, of European economy, a lot of the economy that we have today is dependent on IP directly or indirectly. If you are, for instance, language teacher, English teacher, French teacher, etc., or if you are teaching music or arts, then of course you could approach the issue of IP through the prism of copyright. So all the rights that are granted to authors of, novels, composers of music, etc. So starting there, asking them what is their favorite, book, music, etc. On a given topic, and then extending, talking about the rights relating to the work. Intellectual property, just to give you an example, is also the reason why a given book that perhaps you like will not have 1 million movie adaptations, for instance, because of course you cannot adapt a book unless you have secured the copyright in order to adapt it into a movie. So these are all issues that perhaps you can bring up if you are teaching, let's say, more artistic or literary classes. And perhaps one last example, if you are teaching, for instance, sciences, of course, then depending on what you are teaching on a day or during the semester, you might actually, for sure, find a lot of inventions or things that you can tie to. Here it would be mostly the issue of patents of technical inventions. As mentioned, a lot of medicines are patented, a lot of chemical compounds as well, a lot of processes, etc. So if you're a science teacher, you could also start by the angle of patents and then extend a little bit more. But those are all basically just examples. And that's why after that, we also have included more more general recommendations. So here, this is probably our top tip. Tip number 7, try with games. As just mentioned, in fact, you could, if you are teaching a subject that has direct links to IP, feel free to really make a link to your subject, literature, arts, science, and just go from there. At the same time, it might be sometimes a bit forced to students. It might feel a bit like trying to really start something new. So that's why we have created a lot of contents that we believe are fun for teenagers. And especially we have created a set of games. So 4 clicking games. And here you have the link to the website to check them out. They are all on the website for free. We have created 4 clicking games about IP and fashion, IP and streaming platforms, electronic devices, and IP and social media, which is one I really like, that aim at showing teenagers that IP is everywhere around them. So it's just, you see a room or a part of a room with different objects, and this is like a little quiz asking them what they think. Then we have a slideshow, which apparently was quite well received during our testing phase. It's called the Trademark Cemetery. It's not even really a game, it's just something interactive that shows teenagers the importance of brands, of a good trademark, basically, that how sometimes trademarks can become so good that they will slide and stop being trademarks, and they will actually pass into the everyday language, and they will be used as nouns to actually describe specific objects. So that's why we call it Trademark Cemetery, because some of the trademarks in this slideshow are actually dead, because they now are they have passed into the usual language. And this one was actually quite popular. I think it has a very Halloween thematic of, spooky cemetery stuff, and I think this was quite well received. And finally, we have also 2 interactive videos that I really like. These are cartoons. Cartoons, they present one teenage boy and one teenage girl, and in those 2 situations, each teenager is faced with the possibility of infringing IP rights. And what this video does is that it asks questions. What do you think they should do? Do you think it's okay that, the boy, for instance, goes onto this website, this streaming website? Do you think it's safe, etc.? So these are, in our opinion, quite fun. And perhaps it could be simple as that, just to start with the games and see where this takes you and where this takes the conversation. And yeah, just a mini comment here about the games. We have tested the games during the testing phase of this project, and we got feedback from the teachers that the games were very well received, especially the interactive videos, but more for audiences, so younger teenagers, so usually from 12, 13 to 15. We have teachers who told us that honestly, teenagers who are 16, 17, they didn't really like the interactive videos, the cartoons so much, because they found them a little bit too easy, a little bit childlike. On the other hand, younger students, 12, 13, 14, really loved them. So perhaps something to keep in mind. This brings us to one of the last tips, and here we try to make it easy for you. Perhaps it's obvious, but again, we are not teachers, but once again, we've all been teenagers at some point. We all have teenagers in our families or friends, and then we know that, it's not very likely that students will get really interested in a topic if it's presented in a boring way. So that's why we really, not only do we suggest to make it fun, but in fact, on this one, we really try to make it fun for you, because we really try to develop topics, as mentioned, only on topics that would be, to develop materials that would be really relevant to teenagers. Social media, fashion, streaming, etc. So the idea is that perhaps using these fun topics that kids can relate to, then it would be actually, more fun to bring this up in class and not so boring and legal, which is what we're really trying to avoid. We know that if we start with the international regulations, international agreements on copyright protection, we will have 0 chance. So we try to forget about the legal stuff and really make it fun and practical. This brings us to tip 9, which is another idea. So again, you can start a conversation based on what you are teaching. You can start a conversation based on a couple of games. Another recommendation we have is that we can also start by something you see around you. And well, if you're teaching teenagers, it shouldn't be so difficult, because probably you will see some which are wearing branded sneakers, branded hats, like the coolest headphones, earphones, etc., etc. So it's also a way to start the conversation, to just check a bit what's around you in terms of brands, in terms of technology, and then, well, isolate one or two elements in the class, what they are wearing, what they are bringing, and asking them about the brands. Why do they like this brand more than another one? Would they actually buy, well, a similar product that would be very similar, same functionalities, but that wouldn't have this Apple logo, for instance? Like, would they buy the same shoes if they know it's not Vans, but it's just something they bought 20 euros? Would they see a difference? So things like that. You can start by basically checking like a few objects that they like, a few brands that they like, and asking them why they like this brand and how important the trademark is for them, how important like the technology is for them, and what are the IP aspects. Usually for teenagers it would be trademarks. What are the aspects that they actually find most important for them? So this would be another way for us to, well, to approach it. And this brings us to our last recommendation. Again, another way of approaching this in class. Again, in the end, you tell us what works best for you. But we also believe that another way to do so is to simply start the conversation directly, asking them about the consequences of counterfeiting. Because as mentioned earlier, in fact, many people, and teenagers even more, but even citizens in general have no idea that counterfeiting and piracy is harmful to the economy, is harmful to them, is harmful to other companies, etc. So it could be sometimes useful just to start directly from this angle, asking them, okay, did you ever stream well, a movie from a free platform, illegal content? Like, did you ever buy like well, a fake well, imitations of, I don't know, headphones from this brand? And well, do you think it matters? Like, do you think this has an impact? And basically just starting the conversation to see a little bit what are the teenagers' arguments about this. And again, for sure, you will get the arguments that I talked a little bit about before, which is, well, IP is not relevant to me, it's boring, it's legal, I'm not concerned. This benefits only big multinationals. This is only for companies, not for individuals, etc. And then etc. And then basically, this could help you raise awareness. And then you could also use all the supporting materials that we have created to help you go through the conversations with examples and case studies. And well, that's it for the tips. So here I would just like to take 30 seconds to tell you a little bit how the project is going so far. Well, we have tested it, as mentioned a few months ago, and we were quite lucky because, in fact, we had a total of 60 interested participants from 5 different institutions. So we had a couple of future teachers joining us. We had some teachers in secondary schools and also some students directly, some kids. And all of these people were very kind, actually, and interested to test the materials. The teachers went through the course. They isolated some contents that they liked, the games, etc. They tried it on the classroom. And well, these are the results. The main participants' feedback so far is that generally the contents were from IP4Teen were very well received. They were found to be easy to understand, relevant to teenage audiences, which was something we really wanted to check because, yeah, again, we are not teachers, so we tried to do something fun and relevant, but we were not sure. And then the testing actually confirmed that we were quite on a good track and that we did something that was relevant and fun for kids. And then participants also told us that the course and the different materials helped them change perception a little bit about how they see IP, perhaps from a more negative thing to something more positive and worth protecting. And as mentioned before, well, as this is obviously a course that is designed for teenagers, we got, well, a couple of feedbacks from teachers telling us that honestly, some of the contents that we created were better suited, in fact, perfect for younger ages, so 12 to 15, especially the cartoons that we have created and well, the interactive videos. So this is just for you to know if you have several ages, if you are teaching several levels in class, perhaps, yes, to target a little bit. And yes, there we are. So basically, here in a nutshell, what we would really like to stress is that intellectual property is a legal topic, but it doesn't have to be boring, and it can be approached in a lot of lighter ways. And we believe, in fact, that when approaching it in class, it can really help boost the awareness of kids, of teenagers at a younger age, and in turn achieve everything that we said we would try to achieve, which is, well, raise awareness and help reduce, the impact of counterfeiting, etc. Well, again, for this, we need you. We need the teachers. And as you can see here on your screen, you have a little pop-up window that invites you to check the MOOC website. So this is not, well, you have the project website where you have all the contents, but if you want to take the online course in its entirety, it's also free. You can go directly to the MOOC platform. You have to register. It will take you 2 minutes, and then you can take the course. So we would like to really invite you for teachers and multipliers, people who work in IP awareness raising, to check out the MOOC. Just so you understand, the MOOC, so the online course, is a bit more structured. So here we will really take you step by step and explain to you. We have also additional explaining videos. Well, some colleagues and myself are in fact talking to you in introduction videos about each module, each content, etc., to tell you a little bit what to do with it. And then we have organized all the course in quite easy structure, but like thematically speaking, every time you have a case study, infographics, then interactive content, etc., and also explanations how to address it in class. So the MOOC is, let's say, the structured way of going through the course. And at the end, you have like a mini feedback that you can fill in if you want. And then, of course, keep in mind that if you want a participation certificate for your employer or your school, this is also something that you can request. At the same time, if perhaps right now you don't have time to take the MOOC, but you just want to check out the contents, it's also possible. You just go to the websites, to our project website, and you just go to we have an entire resource section, which is for you to use. And again, it's all free. So the idea is really that these contents were made for you. They were made to disseminate as much as possible in Europe. And really, whenever, like, if you want to use them to republish them on your school website, for instance, to send them to your colleagues, feel free to do so. This is the entire purpose, in fact, of these contents. And I think this brings us, in fact, to the end of this presentation.
Well, thank you very much, Lea. It was a very comprehensive webinar. I think we all learned a lot about not only IP, but also how to explain to the teenagers you have in class how to develop this topic. So let me remind you that if you have any other query or suggestion, or you simply want to have further information about this topic, the IP4Teen team is at your entire disposal in Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. So you can have us in info@ip4teen.eu, ip4teen.eu in the other platforms. You can, of course, send us an email to this info@ip4teen.eu. And of course, we hope you enjoyed the webinar. Hope to see you soon, and goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.